All right, welcome back, everybody. Welcome to Just Lawing Around podcast with Carl Knapp and me, Jimmy James. Today, we're going to be talking about child support and basically everything in between, from how to file child support to who is eligible for child support, how it's calculated, and everything. I'm sure you deal with this a lot in your day to day, right, Carl?
Yeah, hey, how's it going, James? I do a lot of child support stuff. People always have questions about child support, and I think we're going to hit some of the big areas today. Everybody knows, first of all, you got to have a child, right, to get child support. So
I mean, do
that's
you though? I mean, what about
pretty
adoption? I guess adoption's still a child, right?
Yeah, if you adopt somebody, then you're obligated to support them. You're not obligated to support like stepchildren and stuff. So if you marry somebody and they have a kid already, that's not your responsibility to support them. At least legally, it's not. Most people do it
Right.
anyway. But
That's
yeah,
true.
it's
I
it's
always thought about that. For some reason, I always thought if you got married, that would alleviate like child support for somebody.
Yeah, a lot of people feel like, oh, if you have a kid with somebody and then they marry somebody else, hey, now it's their problem, right?
Well, what about, I mean, if they get married, does that change their income? Like when they're doing the calculations, or is it just the income of the one person?
Yeah, when you look at the incomes, you just look at the parents, right? So if
I'm sorry, just to be very clear, the biological parents. So
the
if they're
yep,
married, it's not a household income; it's an individual parent income.
correct, yeah.
Ah,
So
okay.
if you and your wife get separated and you have a kid and your wife goes and marries Bill Gates, right? A billionaire.
Right.
Yeah, they're not going to look at Bill Gates's income. They're going to look at, the biological parents, as you said.
So what I'm hearing is if you're on child support, it's best that your spouse makes more money.
Yes, that's exactly right. Yes, yes. Because spousal support is strictly based on the incomes of the parents, right?
Child
So
support, not spousal.
I'm
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
spousal is too. Sorry, you're
Oh,
right.
okay.
They both are, but we're sticking with child
Okay.
today.
All right.
So, but you're right. People who make more pay more. So if the other parent makes a lot of money, the amount of support that they pay is going to go up.
So you say people who make more pay more, and a lot of the things I've ever understood was it was, and correct me if I'm wrong, I thought it was a calculation based on what you're capable of making.
The courts generally will look at what you actually make. And they'll look at your pay stubs, they'll look at your W-2s, your tax returns to determine what your income is. If you are underemployed, in other words, suppose you only work 20 hours a week, right?
Right.
Or you have a law degree, but you work for McDonald's, right? They under those circumstances, they're going to do what's called an earning capacity. So
Right.
they're going to
Okay.
say, "Oh, okay, this guy, he's got a law degree or he's an engineer, he can make more than $15 an hour at McDonald's."
Right. Okay.
So if you're adequately employed, yeah, they're going to use what you make. If you're underemployed, they're going to try to give you some sort of earning capacity. That's kind of that gets a little trickier because you have to look at, what other people in an industry make, and can that person really make the same amount of money? But most people, it goes by exactly what they make, for the most part.
Okay. So I feel like a lot of people feel like it's a male responsibility to pay child support. Now I'm not saying it's not, but women can also be on child support as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It goes by who, and I think we touched maybe just as an overview on our first podcast, but it goes by who has the majority of the time with the kids. So you basically say who has 50% or more of time with the children. So for example, if the father has three-quarters of the time with the kids, then mother's going to pay support. It doesn't it's not a male or a female thing. Most people say, oh, dads pay. But if a dad has primary custody, then the mother's going to have to pay.
Yeah, I mean, well, I think it's more common for the mom to have primary custody, but I think there are a lot of circumstances, especially these days, maybe with addiction or mental health, that the father could get primary custody, and the mother, I guess, would have to pay child support. But I feel like it would be more common for the male to do it. But I didn't know, like, even if depending on custody and how the custody is laid out, they could both be paying some form of child support.
You could normal if you're it depends. When you get to a pure 50-50, right? And the courts, what they do is they look at overnights. So you count the amount of overnights each party has. If you get to a pure 50-50, the party who makes more pays the other party. So you normally will not have a circumstance where they both pay each other, because it's usually one or the other, or in a pure 50-50 and they both make the same,
Right, right. Well,
then nobody pays. Yeah.
I apologize. I meant there's circumstances where the mother might pay the father, or there's circumstances where the father will pay the mother, not both
Oh,
paying
yeah.
each other at the
Oh,
same
no.
time. Right,
No,
right.
no, I'm sorry. Yeah, yeah. No, you're right. Now, I thought you were trying to throw me a curveball,
No,
because
no,
you
no.
can.
I think I worded it that way, but I didn't mean to.
Well,
um,
you can have, and I know we're not really getting there, but you could have a scenario where, for example, one party pays the other party spousal support, and then that party pays the other party child support. So you could have what's called an offset order, where, I may be the primary custodian of the kids, so my wife owes me child support, but I make more than she does, so she owes me spousal support. So you
Interesting.
could have dueling support orders, but they're not both for the child or the children.
I never even thought about that, like how they could like cancel each other out, kind of, and just like
Yeah, yeah.
that's interesting.
Usually they you can have an offset, and it's not that uncommon, because you could have the party who makes more money has the kids, but they also owe spousal support to the other. And I think we're going to do a whole podcast at some point on spousal support. But yes, it will offset. So the one party, pays 500, the other party pays 300. So they net it out and say, okay, the payment's going to be 200, right?
Right.
And that happens. That happens quite
Well,
frequently,
not to
actually.
dive into spousal support, but just for the sake of the conversation, child support and spousal support are relatively close to the same, aren't they? Or
They
no?
they are calculated completely different. Child support is done pursuant to child support guidelines, and there's a grid. It's based on net incomes of the parties, and how many kids you have. Spousal support is based on the difference between the two incomes. So it's calculated a little
See,
bit differently.
I feel like that's just like adult child support. You know what I mean?
Well, look, that you said marry somebody with money, right? And I always joke about it, but right, if you make $150,000 a year and your wife makes 50,000 and you get divorced, you're going to be paying her support
So,
because you.
so spousal support is the same way where the woman can pay the man spousal support as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It doesn't, it goes strictly by who makes more, and in this day and age, there's a lot of women that make more than their husbands. I mean, it's not uncommon, and sometimes husbands make more than wives. But yeah, it doesn't matter who, whether you're male or female. It's just, if you make more, you're going to pay. Um,
That's interesting. I
yeah,
like that.
people. Yeah, yeah. And look, everybody that pays doesn't like it, so it is what it is. But yeah, I tell people, like, well, you make a lot more than your spouse, so you're gonna owe.
Right, right. So you better stop making
Yeah,
so much money.
or
Oh.
you should have married somebody who had a better job, I guess. But
All right,
yeah,
so we kind of just jumped right into that because my mind just got so curious with those things. But I guess if you're thinking child support and you're not sure what to do, what would be the first step, or like, who files it, who does it, where do you do it, who's like, how's that process begin?
yeah.
Do you even need a lawyer? Like, how do you do all this?
The child support, they've made it significantly easier for people to do by themselves. You file with the domestic relations section of the county, either the county you live in, or it can be the county that the defendant lives in. So you could choose where you're going to file. If I live in Bucks County, but the mother of my children lives in Delaware County or something, I could file really in either county. So step one is, yeah, you got to pick what county you're going to file, and most people file where they live with the child.
Right.
Um, Sometimes it's easier to file where the defendant is, or the payor, because it's easier to enforce an order if it's in the county where they reside. But without getting too complicated, you file. It's a really simple fill in the blank kind of form that you file with domestic relations. You give them a lot of background information, address, phone number, email, social security numbers, all that good stuff.
Right.
And then domestic relations will then schedule what's called an initial conference. And it's pretty straightforward. They tell you to bring your income information, right? So you
This
bring.
conference is like it's with a judge, or like is it
No,
with the
no.
other parent? Like how is that?
Yeah, but the only people that show up are the parents. The kids obviously don't go to that. So the
Okay.
parents show up, and it's not in front of a judge. It's in front of a domestic relations. They call them conference officers. Most of them are not lawyers. Most of them are just people that have been trained, to punch numbers in, to
So like
calculate
de-escalate and
support.
try and get an agreement.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah, and it takes about an hour. Usually they'll say to mom, okay, where's your pay stub, and they'll look at the pay stub and they'll try to calculate the net income, and then they'll say to dad, okay, where's your pay stub, and they'll calculate the net income, and then they put it into the formula and it spits out a number, right? Either side can then kind of argue, well, the number's too high, the number's too low. But for the most part, whatever the guideline number you're pretty much stuck with
Well,
that.
like before we started the podcast here, we were talking about like extras, like camps and daycares. At this point in that process, is that accounted for? Is that something that you bring up now, or do you wait till later?
Usually, no, all that would be addressed at what we call the initial conference, right? So the way it works is there's what's called base child support, right? And that's what, when you look at the child support guidelines, that's the number you get. So your base number could be it's called $800, right? $800 a month, and then but that does not cover. Then there's a whole bunch of extras that they add on to that. So things like camp. If your kids go to camp in the summer, they're gonna ask for a receipt and say, okay, how much is camp? Do they go to the YMCA camp? Do they go to a private camp? Do they go to overnight camp? They take that number and then divide that up between the parties. Daycare is another big, big expense, because if you work, most people that have young kids have to have daycare.
Right.
So if you pay $200 a week in daycare so you can work, or if mom does or dad does, then domestic relations is going to take that number and they divide it and they add it on top of the base child support number. So some people look, I know a lot of people with Google and everything nowadays, right? Everybody goes online and they go, oh, okay. And they punch in the numbers and the child support says $600. And then they might come in to see me or something, and they go, "Well, I looked it up online. It says I owe $600." And then I said, "Well, did you put the daycare in there?"
Oh
No.
damn.
Yeah. Did you put the camp in there? No. Did you put the medical insurance premiums in there? No. Um. So yeah, the base number is a little deceiving, because there's a lot of extras. As I said, daycare is usually a big one, especially if you have young kids. Daycare is so expensive nowadays.
Oh my god, yeah. It's like
And
having a
and
whole nother apartment. Like
a lot of times the daycare and the camp is bigger than the base support order, right? So people sometimes are naive and they come in and they think it's going to be a very low number, and then if you pay $1,000 a month in daycare, usually then you split that between the parties. So even if you just split it 50-50, right? That's $500 a month more you got to add on. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of things that kind of the base child support really doesn't
Well, thinking
cover.
about like daycare and stuff, like what about it? So custody and child support, they're two separate matters, right? They don't intermingle when it comes to orders, or do they?
They Well, they go on different tracks, right? So procedurally, they go on different tracks. Child support goes through domestic relations, custody goes a different direction. But the child custody factors in if you, depending on how much time you have with the kids. Once you get over 40% of overnights, you get a slight discount under the child support guidelines.
Well, like
So
another reason that I was asking that was because like
yeah,
you were talking about, well, we were talking about like the daycare and that being added on as a child support expense. What if you're in that hearing and you're like, well, they don't need to go to daycare. I can just take them. Like what happens in
yeah,
a scenario like that?
That that comes up quite a bit, actually. It's a good question. It depends. It depends on whether you're doing support first or whether you're doing custody first. If you have an existing custody order in place when you go in front of domestic relations, they will not they will not change that order, right? So they won't say, "Okay, Dad, you can watch the kids during the day." If you don't have an order, then it's something up for discussion. So, yeah, a lot of people say that. Well, I don't want them in daycare. My mom can watch them, right?
Right.
My mom can watch them, and she's not going to charge us.
Right.
Okay. That's an argument. The courts will look at it. They'll look at the history. Like if the parties were together and the kids were in daycare, it's much more likely that they're going to order daycare, right?
So
If
you're saying like if there's no order in place and that's open for discussion. Now, when you say that, does that mean like, okay, mom wants to put him in daycare, but dad says, okay, you know what, I can watch him, so that alleviates that expense. Say mom is okay with that. Does that then get written into a custody order right then and there, or is that just an agreement between the two of you?
it would be assuming you're at domestic relations, they would not order any daycare payment, right?
Okay, so they wouldn't make a
So
custody order, but they would alleviate the order of
correct.
payment. Okay.
Correct. Yeah, they would not get into the custody end of it because the domestic relations officers, they don't have any authority to do that.
Right. That's kind of
Uh,
where I was getting.
yeah, I mean the parties can kind of modify the order a little bit and say, there's no daycare because grandma's going to watch the kids, right? That can you could put that in the order just to explain why there's no daycare award.
Okay,
But
so
it can always be changed too, which is the other side of the coin, right?
right.
So
Well, and that right there, if you're saying it can be changed, if you go in there, they type in this formula. They'll say, okay, the opposing parent or whatever owes, we'll say $600 a month, and say the other parent was like, you know what, he or she is a really good parent. I don't need that much. I just need a little bit help. Let's just do 300 a month. Is that something that can be agreed on, or is their formula set in stone?
no, the formula is if there's no agreement, generally domestic relations will enter an order pursuant to the formula, right? Because the rules say, hey, the number that the formula comes up with is the right number. But
Okay.
you're right. A lot of times, domestic relations might say, okay, we crunch the numbers at $600 a month, and dad or whoever's paying it or mom might say, ugh, I can't, I can't pay 600, right?
Right.
I can only pay 500. Yeah, if both parties agree to that, then they will write it up as 500. They usually put something in there that this is a non-guidelines agreement by the parties, and the parties agreed to $500.
Okay.
And that happens actually. That's not uncommon. It happens pretty fairly often. It depends on how much people hate each other.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure emotions can
Yeah.
run high in those situations.
I would say the problem with once if you're going to do an agreement like that, it's generally better to do it ahead of time because once domestic relations kind of spits that number out, right? Then everybody kind of is like, well, they said the number should be 600. I'm not taking a penny less than 600,
Right,
right?
right.
And so unless you have some issue, well, they calculated my income wrong, or they put my bonus in and they shouldn't have put my bonus in, or they ran the
Oh,
wrong
wait,
number.
bonuses, like work bonuses, they get accounted for too?
Oh yeah, yeah. Work bonuses, basically all overtime. Um, Generally, what they do is they try to they look at like a 6 month window to see, how much you make over that period. Because you have some people that are like seasonal, right? That I have,
Oh, yeah,
clients.
sure. Snow
Yeah,
removal and stuff like
snow
that.
removal.
Landscapers. Yep.
Landscapers may kill it over the summer, right? But in December, if they're in domestic relations and they show their pay stub, it's going to be small, right?
Right.
But
Yeah.
they will try to seasonal employees and stuff. They'll try to spread it out over the year and say, okay, yeah, you make a lot in the summer, you don't make too much in the winter, but if I average it out, you're going to make,
Oh, okay,
you know,
so yeah, that makes sense. They do an average of it.
yeah.
So we've already figured out if you want to file child support, who can do it? Mom or dad could do it. Where you do it, you file in either the county you're in or the county that they're in. Now, once you go to this conference and you get assigned to meet with these people, say there's two scenarios that could obviously come out of that. You're either going to come to an agreement and walk out of there, or you're not going to come to an agreement. So if you come to an agreement and a child support order is written up, it's filed, and you walk out, and that's it, correct?
That's it. Yeah, you will leave that day. Now they do them on Zoom, but yes, they in the olden days you actually walked out of there with a piece of paper that everybody signed, and that was your child support order. And
Okay.
it would say what the amounts are. It would say what it covers. 50% of camp, 50% of daycare. Medical insurance premiums are part of that. And then yeah, that's your order. And you're done. You don't go on after that. If you don't reach an agreement, then there is a next level, most counties, which is it's called the hearing officer. They used to call them support masters, and that is more of like a mini trial. They do the same thing, but it's a little more formal. You have to kind of present evidence, and they still use the same child support guidelines, but it's a little more formal. And those people are lawyers, unlike the domestic relations people that are not lawyers.
Okay, so if you're all right, so back in the beginning, we were talking about obviously you have to have a child in order to get child support. It doesn't necessarily have to be your child, though, right? It's just a child that you have custody of. Like, how does that work? Like, could like a grandparent, inherit the custody of their child, due to addiction or whatever the case is, and then charge the child for child support? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, they could. If you are raising the child, right? They call it the fancy legal term in loco parentis, right? That's Latin. It means you are serving as the parent, right?
Crazy parent, isn't
So
that Spanish?
yeah,
Loco,
loco.
loco,
In loco
crazy parent.
parentis. I don't speak Spanish, but I think it's yes. But yes, if my yeah, if my parents are raising my kids and my kids live with them, they could file for support against me.
Even without custody.
Well, they would have to have custody. They would have to have custody of the kids. So
So,
if I go to rehab, right, and I can't raise my kids and my kids are living full time with my parents can sue me and my wife, right, for child support.
well, okay. So I guess what I'm struggling to make
Yeah,
clear here is what defines custody.
well, two things define custody, I guess. One, if you have a court order, that defines custody, right? But
Right.
the other thing, if there's no court order, or if the court order doesn't reflect reality, basically custody is the simple version is where do the kids spend, the most of their overnights, right?
Okay.
So you could have a custody order that says your daughter or son lives with you, but if in reality they have slept at your parents' house for the last 6 months,
Then
that's
they just naturally inherit a custody.
yeah, that's going to override the custody order because look, you have a lot of people that enter in our custody order, right? And then they change it.
Sure.
They don't go back to court, but they say, you know what, I changed jobs. I can't have the kids every week anymore, so you keep them,
Right.
right?
Right.
So the order is there, but the courts are really going to look at what's happening in reality, right?
Okay.
A couple overnights here and a couple overnights there isn't going to change anything. But, if you move to New Jersey and your mother is raising your kids, she's now serving as the parent of those kids and she can seek support.
Now, is that like is there a time frame to when that can begin? Like obviously, if the mother's taking care of them, they just held on to them for the weekend. They can't go file custody for that.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's got to
Yeah.
be some guideline for that, right?
Yeah, and there's no like hard and fast bright line test as they call it,
Sure. Yeah.
I would say if I was representing somebody, I would think would have to be at least a few months.
Okay.
Like you said, a weekend isn't going to do it. A week here,
So
a week
30,
there.
60 days, somewhere in that.
I more, usually I get these questions when, it's been 6 months, right? I think 6 months is clear.
Right.
In the law, there's a lot of gray areas, right? I think a month is probably not enough, and I think 6 months is plenty. So 3 months, probably.
Okay.
Right. Um,
I know I keep hitting you with random questions here, but like I said, normally when we do these I just have these questions start popping up as we're
yeah,
talking.
yeah,
Ooh.
they're good. I say they're good questions, and a lot of these. It's funny because I've been practicing a long time, right?
Mm.
And it's amazing how many questions I will get, and it'll be like, wow, that's never come up before, right?
Right?
You would think over 30 years, everything's been handled, right?
Well, so
But
branching
yeah,
off of the whole, grandparent having custody thing, it made my mind think, well, like what if somebody's in like a 30 or 60-day rehab, or what if somebody's in jail and there is an existing support order, or what if there's not? Are they at that point still responsible for support?
they are. If you're under a support obligation, right, and then if you go to jail, and if I understand your question right,
Hmm.
normally they would suspend that order while you're in jail, because you're just not going to be able to pay it,
Right,
right?
but
It's
suspend as in
impossible.
you don't have to pay it now, or are you going to have to pay it later? Are they still counting that?
It depends. If you have a material change in circumstances, right? And that could be, oh, I got arrested and I went to jail, or it could be I got laid off, right? I got fired, or I got in a car accident and I can't work.
Right.
And you're subject to a support obligation. You should file what's called a petition to modify, right? And that's filed with the domestic relations section, same thing. And basically what that says is, hey, there's a court order in place, but things have changed, right? When you guys entered the court order, I was making 50 grand a year working, right?
Right.
Now I got laid off and I'm on unemployment, or I was in a car accident and I can't work.
Right.
So you should file to modify, because to answer your question, if you don't, that order just keeps racking up,
Right.
right? It just keeps racking up, and until if you don't pay it for 6 months, you're going to have a huge arrearage, is what they call it, back support,
Sure.
and then you get in trouble, right? Then they start looking for you. That's when they start bringing you in, and they can threaten you with jail, and they can suspend your driver's license,
Well,
all
what if
these
you're in jail and
things.
you're like, what if you're in prison? I don't know, saying a 5-year sentence, right? And
Mhm.
I know maybe I'm going too far down this wormhole, but this is how my mind works. If you're in there and like, what if you get a jail job and you start making, pennies or whatever they make?
Yeah.
Are they
Eight
going to
eight
take
eight
some of
cents
that?
8 cents a day.
Yeah.
They're probably not gonna bother with something. it would probably be suspended because the the courts they kind of pride themselves on how much they collect, right? So they don't want an order running. If that guy's in jail, it was 600 a month, right? There's no way in hell he's going to pay it on
Right.
his prison job, right?
Right.
So most of the time they would suspend it, which means it stops charging, right? It stops racking up
Okay.
until he gets out of jail, and then it would start running again, right?
So earlier you mentioned about like an accident. I mean, like, what if you were in an accident and the injury was enough to disable you from being able to work, or even what about like if you don't work and you receive disability? I mean, will they take
Yeah,
part of the disability check?
they will take part of the disability check if you are unemployment. Like if you get unemployment compensation, they will take that wage attach it, right, and they take a piece of your check. Now you would probably want to go and modify the amount, right, because
Sure.
if you're making again 50 grand a year and then you go on unemployment, it might be half of that, right?
Right.
So but you still have to pay if you're on unemployment, you still have to pay if you're on disability. You just pay at a lower number because you're bringing in less,
Okay.
right?
All right.
And then
So
the
that
mm,
should answer the question. Like, if you're making $50,000 and then you quit your job, that doesn't alleviate you from having to pay. It just might change how much you have to pay.
correct. Well, and quitting is a little different, right? Because you can't, the law is you can't voluntarily reduce your income, right?
Okay.
So quitting a job is, you going in and saying, "Hey, I'm out of here," right?
Right.
So, and then you go back and you say, "Hey, I can't pay child support because I quit my job." They're not going to, under that circumstance, you're going to keep paying as though you're making $50,000 a year.
Okay.
So I sometimes get people that come in and they're saying, "Well, I'm just going to quit my job and not pay her," right?
Right.
Screw her. Well, that's a bad theory, right? That's not if it's something you don't have control over. For example, if you get laid off, right? Okay, business is down and your boss lays you off. Okay, you don't have control over that, right? So
Right.
you're not making the decision. Or if you get injured on the job and you can't work and you get workers' comp, that's not something you deliberately did
Right.
to avoid. But you can't just quit a job or take a lower paying job to avoid paying support.
Okay.
And I get these, they come up somewhat frequently because sometimes you'll see a scenario where say, "Hey, look, I'm making under our scenario, right, a $50,000 a year job, right?
Hmm.
But I want to stop because I want to go to law school, right? So I'm going to stop working or I'm going to work part time now, and but I'm going to go to law school. When I graduate law school, I'm going to make twice as much, right? So under that scenario, that's a little different, right? Because you're really trying to improve your earning capacity. So those cases get a little tricky, right? Because you're not quitting to reduce your support, you're trying to improve your earning ability so you can pay more. Those cases get a little tricky. A lot of times you end up in court, and some judge eventually will have to decide that.
Right.
But that's not that uncommon. But I have sometimes people say, "Well, I quit my job so I go back to school and get an MBA." Okay. Well, in the interim, you don't have any income, right? So,
Right.
I
Okay. That makes sense.
yeah, yeah. So some of those things come up. You get the big thing in support a lot of times is people that are self-employed, right? Those cases are trickier because they control how much they make, right?
Right.
It's not like when you work for an employer, you get a paycheck and you get a W-2 at the end of the year.
Right.
Somebody who's self-employed, if you're self-employed, whatever,
Well, I'm sure
plumber,
that's a lot of
landscaper.
problems now, especially with like door dashing, Lyft. I mean, aren't you technically like self-contracted under those?
And it's sometimes those I think, and I don't know that much about DoorDash or Lyft. I think I'm assuming they keep some track of what you make, right? I don't know if you ever
Yeah, I think they
DoorDash
send you
or
a 1099 or whatever it's called at the end of the year that tells you how much you made, but they don't withhold the taxes of any sort.
right, right. So that would be like a gross amount, and then you could deduct, business expenses or stuff,
Sure,
right?
sure, yeah.
But yeah, self-employed people, like, obviously I'm self-employed, but you bring in income and then you pay expenses. But I could tweak my expenses so my bottom line is very low, right? I can put my kids on the payroll, right?
Right.
Even though they're not doing anything, right? I can
Well,
I
yeah,
can
that brings up an interesting thing though. Like, what if you have a child support, or you don't have full custody of your child, and the mother wants, or the I don't mean mother, but mother or father wants to go for child support, and what if you employ that child? Like, how would that have
yeah,
any effect on it?
no, no. How much the kid makes is not considered.
Okay.
So, if the kid has a part-time job or something, they don't they don't consider that. I mean, in a scenario like that, you could probably, I mean, hopefully you could reach some sort of agreement, right? Because that's kind of, instead of paying mother, then mother giving it to the kid, I could say to mother, look, I'm just going to put her on my payroll, right, and pay her.
Right.
The courts aren't going to like that, but you can do anything really by agreement, right?
Right. Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I have some people, and I think you touched on that in the beginning, right? We separate, and I say, "Hey, I'll pay you 500 a month," and my wife says, "Fine." We don't have to go. We don't have to have an order. We don't have to go to domestic relations. We don't have to do anything.
Right. You just do it between you guys, and
Yeah,
keep receipts.
yeah, yeah. And if I'm okay paying 500, and she's okay collecting 500, that's the
Well,
number.
in that case, I mean, being that that's not tracked through the county and being paid through the county and stuff like that, does it matter? Like, does it need to be proven, or does it matter what that money's being spent on?
No, it's supposed to be spent on the children, but child support goes beyond kind of that. So if a father is paying a mother, and suppose the parties have two kids, if father's paying a mother, $1,000 a month,
Hmm.
some of that money is going to go to the rent, right? Some of that money is going to go to the electric bill, right? Some of that money is going to go to the food bill.
Right.
So it's not directly spent on the kids' clothing, but by having a roof over your head, the kids are benefiting, right?
Right.
By having heat in the house, the kids are benefiting.
Yeah,
By
but
having
what
internet,
if you're paying child support and this other person showing up with Rolexes and Dolce Gabbana suits? Like, I mean, that's got to be a problem, right?
it's it it's a problem a lot. It's not a legal problem. It's an emotional problem.
So as far as the court's
Yeah,
concerned, they don't care. As long as you're paying them, then they can do what they want, and you're
exactly.
just hoping they do the right thing.
The courts are not going to ask for receipts. I get clients that come in and they complain and they go, "Oh, I know she's just using that money, on her boyfriend, or they're going out to dinner, or she's
I'm
got
sure it happens. Yeah.
yeah, she's got a new bag or whatever the heck, a Louis Vuitton." I don't even know what
Right.
a fancy bag is, but right. But yeah, the courts are never going to say, all right, you got to show me the receipts. You got $1,000. Okay, did you buy shoes for the kids? Did you buy clothes for the kids? Did you buy books for the kids? They're just, and if you think about it logically, the courts are already inundated with cases.
Sure.
How much more work that would be
Well, I
if they
mean, and
had
at
to
the
go
end of the
through.
day, I mean, regardless of your child support, the child's getting fed, it's getting housed. There's power, electricity, clothes, food. That's all coming
Right.
out. So if she's not spending that money on that stuff, she's at least being reimbursed for what. And I keep saying she, but they are at least being reimbursed for what their expenses are.
Yeah. Yeah, and the kids are expensive, and a lot of it is not like as simple as just, point to it, right?
Right.
Like, your food bill goes up when you have two kids in your house, right?
Absolutely.
Your electric bill goes up, your internet, then you got to have, Netflix and Hulu and all these other things to keep the kids happy, right? So,
Yeah. So
um
I
Yeah,
mean,
they
that covers a lot so far. I have a few more questions, swirling around here. So there's an order in place. You guys made an order, whatever. You life changes, your attitude changes, emotions changes, job changes, whatever the case may be, and you stop paying. What happens in that scenario? Like, as soon as you stop paying, what should you expect?
Yeah, usually it takes usually it's about 30 to 60 days with no payments. Domestic relations monitors the order and they monitor the payments. So nowadays, and not that I'm that old, but years ago you had to like kind of as a lawyer reach out and say, "Hey, he's not paying or she's not paying."
Mm-hmm.
Now it comes up pretty much automatically. If you haven't paid, it's usually about 2 months or so. You're going to get a letter from domestic relations, right? And it's going to say, "Hey, you have an arrearage. You haven't paid in the last 2 months. We're going to bring you in and find out why." Right? And they schedule. I used to call them contempt hearings or enforcement hearings. I think they're now called compliance hearings. They make it not as
Yeah.
scary.
Okay.
But they will send you a letter. They will schedule a hearing. A hearing. It's not really a hearing. It's more of a conference, right? And they'll bring you in if you're the payor, and they'll say, "Well, okay, look, you're supposed to be paying 600 a month. You haven't paid in 2 months. Why not?"
Right.
And, if you say, "Well, I lost my job. Well, I was injured or whatever." If it's something like that, they're going to say, "Well, if you lost your job, you should file to modify the order," right? Because
Okay.
you're still on the hook for it. If it's something like, "Well, I took a trip to Aruba and I don't have any money," that
Or I
that's
just don't want to pay it anymore.
yeah, or I'm done with her because she's not spending the money on the kids. That's a bad answer.
Okay.
They will order you. They will usually what they do is they go, "Look, well, you've got to the end of the month to pay $800 or whatever."
Okay.
And if you don't, you go. Then they put you in front of a judge, and the judges don't mess around with this stuff. They can put you in jail for not payment. Normally, people don't go to jail because they come up with the money, right?
Right.
It's always whenever you're in front of a judge on a contempt or even domestic relations, you always have what I call the get out of jail free card, right? And that's always a certain amount of money. So the judge will say, "Look, you're going to jail today, James, unless you pay $1,000 today."
Okay.
Well, somehow you'll end up that $1,000. You probably your girlfriend or your mom is sitting in the courtroom, right, with her checkbook there, right?
Right. Right. Already knowing
And
what they got to do.
already knowing, I just say that it's amazing how many guys stand there or women, and they stand there and they say, "Judge, I don't have any money. I can't pay. I've got nothing. I don't have it." And then when the judge says, "Okay, well, you're going to go to jail until you pay $800." It's amazing how fast that $800 appears.
Right. Right. For sure. So,
It's very rare that you go to jail. I
w-
mean, there are people that go to jail for it, but
well,
they will break
in that
break
scenario,
your
does
back.
the person being paid have any choice in that? Like, can they be like, "Hey, listen, it's okay. Let's just forget about that and move forward"?
Yeah, they can. They have a say in it. Most times, the person collecting doesn't show up. They're allowed to show up, but they most of the times they don't because a lot of times you have to take off of work or something.
Right.
I sometimes will go on behalf of a client if it's somebody who's really a bad payer. I will go and demand a bigger number, right? Because sometimes if you're not there, the plaintiff's not there, and the defendant comes in and then gives some sad story. Sometimes they'll say, "Okay, well, just pay 500, right, or just pay 600 or something."
Right.
If I'm there on behalf of the plaintiff, I might say, "Hey, look, he's $5,000 behind. Every other month he skips. We want $1,500, right? Five's
Hmm.
not enough. We want
Right.
15." And then it becomes again, it comes kind of a negotiation, but usually if you're there complaining, you'll get more money.
Okay.
A lot of people just, as I said, they don't want to take the time off of work. They don't want to go in there, so they let domestic relations do most of the negotiation.
All right, so it's been 44 minutes, and I've been
Oh,
thinking about this last question for all of it.
uh-oh.
So this will be
Could be
our
a good
last
one.
question, but I'm very
Let's take it.
curious.
Uh-oh.
What if you paid child support for an allotted period of time? I don't know, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 18 years, and then found out that the child wasn't yours? What
So you're
happens in that scenario?
the short answer is you're too bad. If you have paid child support and it turns out ultimately it's not your kid, you're not going to get that money back. But we really have to look back to the beginning, right? Because before any child support order is entered, there usually is some determination of paternity, right?
Well, it's
But that
either an
can be,
assumed or a proven
yeah,
point,
it's
right?
either assumed if most, it doesn't come up that often, but most people, if you're married and then you get separated and, your kids are 5 and 7, everybody assumes it's their kids, right?
Right.
Maybe if it's a one night stand or something, if you come in, if the father or the mother files for support, you have to raise paternity before the conference, right? You can't, because if you go in and go, yeah, it's my kid, and then I'll pay, even if it turns out it's not your kid 5 years down the road, it's kind of too late, right? Because you've acknowledged it's your kid. You've accepted responsibility. You've made payments.
That's
So
crazy to me.
yeah,
So
it's
you
not.
can't, can you civilly sue? Like, is there any way to even get a chance of getting any of that back?
I mean, I guess if you could kind of, the problem is, in the law, you got this thing called waiver, right? Waiver
Right.
is if you don't raise your rights, right? Or if you don't make the argument early on, you waive it, right? So you had the opportunity to say, hey, it's not my kid, or I want a paternity test, or whatever,
Well, if
right?
you did say there was a paternity test, is that, who pays for that? Like yourself, or is that
Well,
factored into the
usually
child support?
they do it right at domestic relations.
They could
If
test you right there.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh wow.
if you go in and say it's not my kid, they usually they do it at domestic relations, or they used to. I think they still do. I mean, I've had clients go there. You go there and they take a little, it's like a Q-tip. They scrub the inside of your mouth to get DNA, and then they do the
Right.
same thing with the kid, and you'll get paternity tests pretty quickly. They'll say it's
But
yours
who
or it's not.
pays for it?
I think it's pay. It's a good question. I think it becomes a cost if you're the party. It becomes a cost that's added into the support order.
Okay.
It wasn't, as I've had a few of them. It wasn't terribly expensive. I mean, I want to say 150, $180 or something.
Okay.
Um, but they kind of build that in. Like when you file for support, there's all these kind of, it's like when you pay a traffic ticket, right? There's all these fees and costs and
Yeah.
fines, and there's $2 for this and $10 for that and
You're
$8.
paying just to have an ambulance on
Yeah,
standby when you got a traffic ticket. Yep.
exactly. So, it's one of these things, computer fee, $8,
Yeah.
there's a processing fee. There's all these crazy fees they just put in there. You
Planet
don't
orbiting
pay.
fee.
Yeah, exactly. You don't pay when you actually file, but it kind of gets built into your order, and you kind of pay a little bit
So
each
one way or
month.
another, you end up paying it. Okay.
Yeah, it's the government, right? So they
Yeah.
gotta get their money somehow. But yeah, it's funny because I think we were chatting right before we got on about I think it was Eddie Murphy or something, where he originally had denied paternity, right? And then they did a DNA test. I was looking at this the other day when I was looking at this stuff, and then he agreed to pay. $51,000 a month in child support for
That's
one kid.
insane. That is insane.
So I guess he tried to deny paternity,
Jeez, man.
and then the DNA caught him, and yeah, so yeah, 51,000 a
Wow.
month. There's a prime example, right? He probably makes more than you and I do, right? So
The child's mom makes more than you and I.
so she's a Spice Girl, I think, right?
Oh my
And
gosh.
but yeah, some of the celebrities pay a lot. But back to the beginning of our conversation, yeah, the more you make, the more the more you pay, and the more kids you have, the more expensive it is, right? Obviously, you pay more for two or three kids than you do for one.
Right, right.
And then I'll touch on that because I know we're getting ready to wrap up because we try to keep these under an hour if we can. But
Yep.
the other thing people ask me, and just because we're talking about number of kids, when if you're paying for say like three kids, right? Then people always say, well, to make the math easy, right? If you pay $1,500 a month for three kids, and then the oldest kid graduates high school, that's when you stop paying when they're 18 and they graduate high school.
Okay.
So they have to, it has to be both, right? So if you're 17 and you graduate, the order runs until the kid turns 18, right?
Okay.
Or if you turn 18 but you still got, you're still in your senior year, it doesn't end until you're both 18 and graduated.
Can
But
that be carried on through like college and stuff? Or is
no,
that's it? 18's it.
18's pretty much it. There is some provision if you have a child that has like special needs, or is like unable to support themselves.
Oh, okay.
Maybe somebody that has mental issues, they can make it go till 21.
Okay.
That's for the most part, it ends at 18. And well, I mean, that's the rule. It ends at 18 and graduate high school. But what I was going to say is like, if you're paying 1,500 a month and the oldest kid graduates, everybody says, well, I guess, now I pay 1,000, right?
Right, right.
Because each kid is 500, but it's not, you actually pay more for the first kid than you do the last kid. So,
Firstborn's
so
most important.
yeah, because it kind of builds, so under my scenario, right, it may go from 1,500 to 1,200, and people go, well, it's three kids, it was 500 a kid. I'm like, no, it doesn't really work that
I feel
way.
like we could
But
do a whole nother podcast just on this because I still
yeah, I
have
think
questions coming up in my brain.
well, what we'll do is we'll figure out, we got a lot more podcasts to go. At some point, maybe we'll even, kind of crunch some numbers and or people want to know how you really come up with the number.
I'd love to
You
get
know.
somebody on here who actually went through this process and talk to them for
Oh,
sure.
I'd love no, I would love that from both sides, right? I'd love
Yeah.
to hear from somebody who's paying it and somebody who's receiving it because
Should we do it with them together?
yeah. As long as they're in separate locations, right? Like, well, I always joke because the person who's paying it is paying way 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 too much, right?
Right.
And the person who's receiving it is just not getting enough to live on,
Right,
right?
right,
So the number must be it must be about right
right.
because everybody who's paying is paying too much and everyone's collecting is not getting enough. So yeah, we'll have to get some people on that have been through the system to see, as I said, I see it from the attorney end of it. I don't,
Right.
you know,
Yeah.
but yeah, definitely see if you can find somebody and we'll bring them on.
Well, with that being said, is there anything else you want to add to today's podcast?
I think that was a good one. I mean, I think we covered a lot. We got a little, far down the road, but that's okay. I know you're always asking me these tough questions, and I'm always trying to try to give you at least an intelligent answer. But
Right, right. No, I think you do well.
yeah, we'll touch next time. Maybe we still, we'll do spousal next time or spousal support, and then we got alimony. We got a whole bunch of other things in the pipeline we'll get to.
For sure. All right. Well, if you guys enjoyed that, be sure to drop a like, drop a comment, share it, or wherever you guys are receiving this, share it if you want to help somebody out who might be going through this. And I guess we'll catch you on the next podcast.